Good afternoon. I'm Kenneth Pacoda. I'm a senior research scholar in the North Carolina State University Sweetpotato Breeding and Genetics program. And today I want to give you some updates on our variety development, specifically our efforts focused towards developing resistant varieties to nematode issues, specifically southern root knot nematode and guava root knot nematodes. They've become a real problem in our industry recently, and we have some very good potential solutions in using genetics. There's a couple things we don't know, and a couple things that we do know. Things that we do know is that the resistance is highly heritable. It looks like a hypersensitive response. The genetics are such that we can make pretty good progress in a relatively short amount of time. But one of the problems with that is that the material that has resistance also is missing some of the key characteristics that we need in a new variety, specifically soil rot resistance. We have ones that don't have the fusarium wilt resistance. And then the horticultural traits are not as developed as our new varieties and what we need for our industry, for our growers, and for our consumers. So we have a fairly heritable trait that's going to be easy to work with, but it's bringing along a lot of baggage that we're going to have to deal with. There's still a couple of things that we don't know about our resistance to guava. We haven't had a really hard field test to put pressure on to see how good our genetic resistance is. We know it's going to play a major role in the management of nematodes in our state and in other states, but we're not sure how big that role or how good our resistance is going to work. The second thing we don't know is how well it's going to hold up over time. We've been very lucky, I feel, with southern root knot resistance, that the resistance is now 50 years old and it's still functionally doing the job in the field. That's unusual, and we're not sure if guava is going to be the same way since it's a different pest. Our funding is largely from the North Carolina Sweetpotato Commission through the legislative funding that was specifically aimed at handling guava and other nematodes. But we also get funding, and thank you for all this, the funding people, from the commodities. The Sweetpotato Commission gives us other money to develop new varieties, crop improvement, ag foundation, certified seed growers. So all this is really important in our development of varieties. But we also have USDA grant called Sweet Armor, which is a multi-state grant to develop varieties and cultural management solutions across the US. So this is a big effort on that. And we also have money brought in by our head of the program, Dr. Craig Yensho, from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to develop new tools in breeding. And these new tools are going to be really important for us to rapidly respond to not only this pest problem, but to new issues and new opportunities in the future.
Hi there, my name is Simon Freyer. I'm a PhD candidate at the NC State Sweetpotato and Potato Breeding and Genetics programs. I also did my master's here in these programs. During my master's, I arrived here in North Carolina right around the time that guava root knot nematode did. And the first thing I did during my master's was start to look for resistance in domestic, locally adapted varieties. Unfortunately, we really didn't have very many of those, and so we had to look abroad. And we first discovered resistance to guava root knot nematode in the variety Tanzania. This is an African landrace variety I don't have here to show you today. It does not grow very well in North Carolina. It tends to be very long and stringy. It's not adapted to our growing conditions. We made the cross between Tanzania and Beauregard, a variety that many of you are familiar with. This is a major variety in North America, and it comes from Louisiana State University. Beauregard is susceptible to the guava root knot nematode. I looked at progenies of this cross and found that approximately half of them carried that resistance, and this motivated us to do what's called a quantitative trait locus analysis, or QTL analysis. All that really is essentially associating your phenotype, or the trait that's observed, in this case resistance, with your genotype, or your genetic markers. And ultimately, we found one region on one of the chromosomes of the sweet potato that was highly influential in controlling resistance to guava root knot nematode. On a different chromosome, we found a similar QTL peak, they're called, controlling for southern root knot nematode resistance. This is sort of where my master's ended, and during my PhD, I've been working on turning those QTL peaks into selectable genetic markers. This allows us to take a DNA sample from a leaf or a piece of storage root tissue, screen for those markers, and know right away if that variety is going to be resistant to these nematodes. We also had to validate these markers, and so we compared them to known varieties across the world: South America, Asia, Africa, and of course the US, including North Carolina's program, Louisiana State, and the USDA. Ultimately, what we found is that our markers for guava resistance are effective in about 96% of cases. They're very highly predictive of resistance. For southern root knot nematode, they're predictive in about 80% of cases, and the genetic mechanism is slightly more complicated for southern root knot nematode. Now, this is all well and good, but as Ken mentioned, we still need to confirm that resistance that we see in the greenhouse, that we see with our markers. We need to confirm that resistance in the field. There's also another concept I'd like to talk about. Ken mentioned baggage. We call this linkage drag. And what linkage drag is bringing in traits that are not necessarily desirable in addition to those traits that are, like your nematode resistance. Imagine if I cross Tanzania with Covington or Beauregard. Many of these progenies will look very poor and not be adapted to North Carolina. Another thing I'd like to mention today is a partnership that we've entered into with Louisiana State University's sweet potato breeding program. What they offer is guava root knot nematode resistance in elite, more refined material than some of these exotic backgrounds that I mentioned, like Tanzania. This has allowed us to rapidly increase our elite genetic materials resistance to guava root knot nematode, while also maintaining high yield, good shapes, good culinary qualities, and that sort of thing.
What I want to show you now is, this is the National Sweet Potato Collaborators Group yield trial. This is a multi-state trial done by all areas that have major commercial acreage of sweet potatoes. And what it does is it allows breeders to enter material into the trial and other researchers in other states to show their growers new materials that are coming. There's only a few breeding programs that actually help all the different states in the country. So in this trial, we have some new varieties that are coming out, a couple that have just been released, and some developmental material that I want to talk about briefly. I like to get you started by calibrating with the major checks lines that most people know who are in the industry, which would be Beauregard and Covington. Now, for each of these trials, this is a trial that was done in a Norfolk sandy loam. This is 101 days. Normally, we like to dig this trial at 101 days because it shows the earliness of varieties pretty well. This year, with all of our dry weather and then the flood, things are running a little bit behind. So they're a little bit smaller than we would have normally dug these to be optimal, but we wanted to show them to you anyway, and you'll get the general impression of how they look here, how they performed in this trial anyway. We're focusing on guava and southern root knot and all the disease resistances. If you look at the charts on here, you'll see there's four categories, or 4 diseases on each of these categories. The first one is whether it's resistant or not to guava. The second item is southern root knot resistance. The third is fusarium wilt, which is still very important. And the last one is soil pox or streptomyces soil rot. S is susceptible, R is resistance, and if they're intermediates, you might be moderately susceptible or moderately resistant. These are what we call the big 4. These are must-haves now in the breeding program or in releases. So Beauregard performed pretty much as Beauregard does. It's sort of how that and Covington are the 2 that we're trying to beat. It's a bit long in this context, but the flesh color is good. Overall, it performed pretty well in this trial. Medium orange flesh, which is typical. Just a classic moist, sweet orange flesh material. This is grown especially more in the deep south and also still in parts of California. Covington, which will be our second variety, is our main variety here in North Carolina, comprising about 90% of our acreage. Moist, sweet, classic orange, good consistent shapes. One of the things it can do is it can handle a lot of varied environments, which this year was a really tough challenge with the hot, dry weather, ended by 7 to 10 inches of rain from the tropical system. And one of the other big attributes is it can handle flooding, and it also ships very well, holds up going across the pond into the European markets. So this is partially what makes Covington the main variety here. So these are to help sort of calibrate you for what we're going to see in the newer varieties. The next one is a new variety just released a couple months ago from LSU called Avoyles, after one of their parishes there. It's sort of a Beauregard type look. The yields have been quite high. They released it largely as a variety for earliness. You can get marketable material in 90 days. And that's held up here. It was tested under line L18-100. We do have some here. We've had a hard time getting a really high pack out, a high percentage of ones versus canners and jumbos. This one has a moderate set of roots and can go into jumbos pretty quickly. But I think if you manage this one well, it can definitely get you early materials, and I think that's the primary reason it was released. I think with this one, the eating quality is also quite good. The storage is okay. The disease package is good. But as you can see on the sign there, it also does not have guava resistance. And one just note of caution, we did have a grower who had it, and we did see some geotrichum in the last couple of seasons. So like with any variety, even our varieties, start small, take a look at it, make sure it works in your system, and you learn how to grow it before you invest too heavily in any new materials. One of our varieties, this is a variety, it's an 09 that we were almost released in 2015, 2016, but it wasn't any better than Covington. It was as good as, the yield was a little better, maybe not quite as consistent as Covington. But when Simon and our group developed the markers, we screened all the material, and this one actually had guava resistance. Not only does it have guava resistance, it has southern, fusarium, and streptomyces. So this has got all four of the major diseases, resistances. So it's a little bit darker skinned than Covington, although after storage, they kind of get mellow a little bit. They become very close. Nice orange flesh. Its yield is really good. The tasting, the eating quality is good. It's done okay in our bake tests. The only thing we haven't done is shipping trials. And if this one ships well, we see this as at least the stopgap between Covington and basically a variety that is Covington with guava resistance. It's not a long-term storage variety. It's probably its biggest limitation. It gets pithy probably somewhere in April and May. So this is one you want to grow, get it out by the major holidays or by early spring. But we see this as a really good potential, if you have a guava problem, to fill in that gap. So here's our two new North Carolina varieties. These are in development before we kind of had guava show its ugly head and cause us to really focus on that. And I want to just mention these. They don't have guava resistance, but one of the things that we've been working for is very uniform shapes, high pack outs that we can utilize a little bit more of our season and still get really, really high yields of number ones. So you'll see the uniformity of shapes and sizes in these two lines, 17-452 and 21-24, are really outstanding. Some of the best we've ever seen in the program. And it's by design that we've developed that. And these have become very key parents in developing guava root knot resistance. We want these attributes, but instead of an S, we're going to have an R for guava resistance there. So that's just a couple examples of that. Another entry in the collaborators that I want to show you is 09-130 from the USDA breeding program in Charleston, who are working very much on disease and insect resistance. This one also does not have guava, again, before that era, but it's got a really nice shape and yield. It was probably one of the best lines that we saw all year last year, and we had in several locations. It's looking good. It has very good streptomyces resistance, and also it's okay for fusarium and southern nematodes. Uniform shapes, good pack out. The only thing we don't know is how well it ships. The eating quality has been done very well in our bake tests and at USDA Charleston tests as well. So this is one that Phil, who's the breeder at Charleston, is considering releasing after he gets this year's collection of data in. It went under some stress there too. He had a lot of rain down in Charleston and he's basically waiting to the end of the season to make a decision on this line here. Another line that we have, and these are ones that we're not really working on, but this is actually a cross between a purple line and an orange line, and it came out with yellows. And it's, so we don't actively breed for this, but these are the sort of things that you get when you breed for other things. And this is one, and next to here is Bonita, which is kind of a market comparison, which is a cream flesh rather than a yellow. The Bonita can have some issues. We had it in a very high pressure streptomyces field, and it looked pretty rough in there. This guy has decent streptomyces resistance, as well as some nematode and fusarium resistance, although not guava. It's one of those things we get for free. We have a number of people who think this is the best eating sweet potato, so we're deciding, I think we'd like to release it. Good uniform shapes, high pack out, good storage. So this is one I think that we'll make a decision this winter as to whether we release it or what to call it. The last thing I want to mention is our purple flesh variety development. We have not actively been pursuing, we're kind of finishing up most of what we have, but we've released Purple Majesty, which is doing quite well and has actually gotten a bit of a following in certain markets. Purple Splendor is another one. Majesty, we have actually seen a little bit. I know I've mentioned this in the past, that you need to put this at the top of the mountain. It does not like wet areas. And we actually saw in some wet, heavy areas a little bit of geotricum and some soft rots. So keep that in mind. Otherwise, it's quite a good variety. Remarkable shapes and yield for a high starch purple flesh variety. Splendor, a little bit shorter, more controlled lengths. Tremendous plant producer. I think that's the thing that worries me most, is it's hard to get good plants because the beds are so dense. Also a high yielding, very good variety, has a little bit better disease resistance than the Purple Majesty. And then one last new one that we're evaluating is P160046, which also has a nice color, but and a good horticultural package. But what makes this one stand out is how it performs in our bake tests. Majesty can be quite polarizing. People love it, people hate it. It's the best thing they ate, it's the worst thing they ate. This one, when we taste it, nobody hates this one, and a lot of people really like it. So it's a little bit sweeter, creamy, just a non-offensive, very nice flavored sweet potato. So hort package is maybe a half step off of a Majesty or a Splendor, but the eating quality, I think, is a couple steps above any other purple that we've ever had. So this is one that we're also considering how we want to release that and how we want to market something with that characteristic.
I'd like to point out some of the Louisiana State material that we're relying on for guava root knot nematode resistance. This variety, this line is called L1431. It's a 2014 line that happened to have guava resistance when guava arrived in the United States. And LSU has kindly worked with us on breeding for guava root knot nematode resistance in a rapid manner. It's orange fleshed, it's moist, it's sweet, it's very similar to that Covington profile, but you'll notice that it has a much darker red skin. That's not exactly what our market desires. We want a variety that replaces Covington exactly. So while it's close to what we need, there's still a few steps that need to be made in order to produce the next Covington with guava resistance. Our primary focus right now is breeding for orange flesh, moist, sweet potatoes, just like Covington. However, by happenstance, sometimes we get varieties that are not orange. Sweet potato is highly heterozygous, so an orange by orange cross could yield whites, it could yield yellows, and any colors in between. This variety here, or this line, is called ML198. It's a cross between Monaco, which is an NC State release, and this line right here, L1431. It's got a bit of a purplish red skin, but you'll notice it's a cream flesh variety. It does have guava root knot nematode resistance, so we were able to acquire that in an NC State line using this parent here. This variety has looked really good over the last couple of years, and what it's sitting next to here is a variety that many of our growers are familiar with. This is called Murasaki 29. Also a cream fleshed with guava resistance. The ML198 line has performed comparable, if not better, than Murasaki over the last couple of years. It also tends to have a little bit more of a refined, nice, clean shape and a slightly better pack out than Murasaki, which can have sort of off shapes from time to time. I just wanted to showcase this single variety, but I want to make the point that we're breeding guava resistance into all the different sweet potato backgrounds. Our primary focus is on something to replace Covington, but we're also, like I said, by happenstance, getting guava resistance in our whites, in our yellows, and now this year in our purples also.